And I thought it maybe a bit too soon to bring it up, but I do know that there was a parting of ways on that tour. And if you could speak to that for a little bit, and then I will play a clip of you and Robert right before you took the tour, just maybe to jog some memory on better times.
Sure. I'm not either sanctimonious or sentimental about these matters. It's with great sadness that we learned that Robert kicked off about a week ago. It wasn't unexpected to me, and I'll be quite blunt about that. I genuinely thought that he was on a death spiral, and it's no great news that he and I had a good friendship over the last few years, because we did. We fell out a couple of times after the Westminster seedings in 2018. I stopped speaking to him for about almost a year, certainly 8 or 9 months, I think it was, because he became very pompous and obnoxious and a pain in the ass to deal with. Everyone who knows Robert, everyone, including all of his family, will testify to the fact that he was a belligerent and cantankerous son of a bitch to deal with. That was part of his charm in a way, but it did get to a point oftentimes where it was painful. Nobody likes to deal with that kind of behavior beyond a certain point, and that was just written into the man's character. And I make the distinction with Robert that A, I loved him, B, he had a great nature, a beautiful nature, and a shit character, and he would have been the first to agree to that. And he needed a lot of PR because he was a very unfiltered human being, and a very brilliant one as well. And so let's just reflect on his brilliance, on what genius he did bring to the table, which I'm at pains to continue to tell all the journalists who are reaching out to me. Please remember his legacy as being true cost economics, open source intelligence, open source engineering, because just those 3 memes alone that he crafted with his brilliant mind will lead to their fulfillment. And that is paradigm changing, paradigm shifting. The rest of it, the kind of MacArthur / P.T. Barnum roadshow shit show that turned into an ignominious spiral of ridiculousness. The USA Resurrection Tour was just a travesty. It was sad. It was sad to witness. But I peeled off after 3-4 weeks with Lee Dundas and Scott McKay precisely because of that obnoxious behavior, which had become completely uncontainable and untrammeled. None of us, least of all me, wanted to be tethered to what was clearly something that was moving into chaos. So that's simple. There was no fist fight, although I did pin him up against the wall in the bus a couple of times leading up to that and said, "What are you doing, man? Reclaim your senses." But he was off on his P.T. Barnum fantasy, and it became a narcissistic fantasy, and that's also okay, But I personally didn't want to tether myself to it any further, because I could see it moving into a very, very negative territory, which was going to have horrible blowback. And peeling off with Scott and Lee was the right thing to do. It was the expensive thing to do for me, because I was walking away from a lot of comfort and a big budget, and no, I didn't get paid. No, I didn't steal the money, and no, I didn't arrange his assassination. So if there are any little digital turds tapping away in the comments, don't bother, you imbeciles. Don't seek relevancy by planting a fucking radish. But the point is, I loved him. We had a great relationship. The last few weeks of his life, he took left fork in the road, and I think that the stress must have got to him. God love him, and I don't think it could have been fun for him being intubated in the end. Has he been exfiltrated to Guantanamo for execution? No, he fucking has not. So stop that kind of irreverence.
I haven't even seen that yet.
Well, yeah, I have. People in the truth community disgust me. They disgust me when it gets to this kind of speculative fantasy. No, he was not cloned. No, they didn't take him up into a Palladian starship to bring him back to preside over the Nuremberg trials. Just stop with that. All of you, stop it.
And just because I think that we can all create, doesn't mean I'm calling myself God. Doesn't mean I'm in New Age, blah, blah, blah. Just, guys, stop it.
Just stop with that. All of you, stop it.
Will you just stop?
Just stop with that. All of you, stop it.
Stop it.
It's really not helpful. Yeah. God bless him. God bless him.
The creative imagination that so many people have. Unfortunately, some of them mean well, but in the community of people who do seek truth, there can be a lot of disinformation in the community that we actually that supports people like you and me for speaking out. It's sometimes those people who actually turn against us, which is like mainstream is not even turning against us, but the people in our own community that support us and has been there for us are the ones that are.
Let's not waste our life force on them, Rachel.
Not one more breath. You answered the question before I asked it, and it was open source intelligence. For those laymen who don't know what open source intelligence is, what could you speak to that for a second? What that is?
Sure.
That Robert Steele was about. Yeah.
It was essentially Robert's reckoning that most, if not all, of the ills of the world geopolitically and socioeconomically had come about precisely because of the travesty of the military industrial complex or the military intelligence complex, and the way in which the intelligence and the military intelligence community had become so empowered through its invisibility and through sequestering information and knowledge, and then backing up their own deviant little CIA tactics and NSA tactics by subterfuge, clandestine activities. All of that is what led to even more wickedness and evil within the CIA and the NSA. Giving power to Majestic 12 back in the day was a terrible mistake. Stopping the flow of information to people by a group of twats in costume and military badges who decided that they alone must know about the extraterrestrial dimension of our reality. And the first contact that we'd made with the ETs, certainly during the Eisenhower era, that was a travesty, which Eisenhower, God bless him, Ike made every effort to warn the world of. The encroachment of the deep state was the gravest threat facing man, and he told it before he left office. It was reminded to us by JFK, of course, at that famous Columbia University speech, which he gave, I think it was 11, 12 days before he was popped, when he also warned the student body there of the encroachment of the deep state, the perverted intelligence community, and how that nefarious element, which was all backed up by secret societies and frankly satanic ritualism, anyone in real power gets to learn that. So that's the bit that Robert David Steele was saying needs a paradigmatic shift. And that in real terms, intelligence should be open source. It should be something which is shared at the pedestrian level. We should all be contributing, not in a snitch culture, not by reporting on your neighbors, but if we were less invisible or less firewalled or less clandestine in our attitudes, it would lead to an open conversation about human health and welfare and security, and so on. So the open source intelligence was also about agencies sharing information across borders and beginning to, in a sense, homogenize intelligence so that any threat became everyone's threat. Any real threat would become everyone's threat. But you see, you have to factor in that if open source intelligence were to be brought into the mainframe, the very first thing it would shed a light on is the crimes and the treason being conducted by the governments and the military complex that props them up. So of course they don't want open source intelligence. And of course good guys like Robert David Steele did want open source intelligence, as you and I would if we knew what it was about.
Right. And being a member of, being a spy, CIA agent. So I want to address just a few of the, not the stupid rumors, but the rumors that might have, not rumors, pontifications of people that might think they have an idea of what's going on because everybody in this day is an investigator, right? So there's a few people that are thinking because he's a CIA spy, okay, number one, could he have faked this? Now, what's weird is right after he died. No, he didn't fake. I know he didn't. So it's just a no.
I'm not going to surf into I'm not going to surf into this territory. Respectfully, I just don't go into this kind of stupefaction. In the first instance, let's just qualify the fact. I don't know what Robert ever meant by a spy. I never bothered to ask him because I didn't want to particularly. I mean, he was a clerk. He was a man working in an office, and he was an analyst, and apparently a very brilliant one. What I've understood is that he was able to do case studies on 20, 30 different cases simultaneously. Now that I believe because I witnessed the man's brilliance. He had an incredible mind. I don't know whether he fell into the spectrum of autism. I don't know if he was partial savant, but I know that he had an incredible capacity to hold information. The RAM in his brain was remarkable. That made him a remarkable analyst. An analyst is not a spy. So you'd have to, I don't know how much of that tiptoed into schoolboy fantasy. I know that he loved, cowboys, and he loved, these kind of archetypal Hollywood boys stories. They turned him on. But again, we'd need to qualify that in the fullness of time.
Yeah. And I get that. And I think people do wonder, like working for the CIA, they often because of that. And CIA's never been, once you learn more about who the CIA is it most of the media and blah, 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 blah. Now I have my gut, my intuition. I felt a little weird about your energy mixing with his energy, and not that it's a bad, good thing or more evolved or not evolved. It's just from where you flow, the energy that flows through you and how you speak, which is in a way a channeling right action, beauty, truth in your beautiful pontifications of words that people respect you for and enjoy listening to you. Because as I said in my first interview, it's like a symphony. Like, I know you realize this, but it really is. And then you have Robert David Steele would say, I don't know what Sasha's saying. He's speaking in tongues and I'm just your American farmer, whatever. It was the dichotomy. And yet I was really interested to find out when it would break down, because I do feel like where he was vibrating from and where you're vibrating from, when those things come together, it's almost impossible, like oil and water. It will separate at some point, although there's nothing bad about putting them together. It's just my gut intuition felt that you on this tour, I don't want to say you were above the tour. You were an immense attraction that brought together and made people listen to people that I don't think they normally would because of you. Yeah. So I think that you were the bond, and that was very important. But that did, in your gut feeling, and many of us we all have it. We just have to tune into it, right? Your Christ-like nature, as you say. Did that not ring inside of you at all? When he did. Talking about. Okay.
Of course it did, Rachel. Look, I brought to Robert the fifth element, as I put it to him. I brought the fifth element into his ambit. He knew that. That's why he loved me when he wasn't throwing rocks at my head, because he recognized that. He was the one asking me years ago to help get him out of the basement, and I was the one leaning in and doing PR and mitigation to get him kind of cleaned up and more filtered, in a sense, in the way that he presented himself. And I'm pleased for that engagement. But yes, there was a brutishness and a reductivity about him, or a reductionism about him, which was not pretty. It wasn't conscious. It didn't flow. It wasn't quantum. It didn't feel great. But I recognize that that's part of the old school. What I know is that Robert had foundationally a very beautiful heart and a kindness, and that was corroborated by the scalar, just so you know, which rapidly depreciated, ironically, as he went on tour. And the readings from pre-tour to a month or 6 weeks into the tour are quite drastic and very dramatic. But that does happen. It's a form of possession which happens to some people. You go off the rails, you get stressed, you get anxious, you're drinking 12 liters of Pepsi Cola and living on Subway sandwiches on the road for a month and a half. You're going to be subject to lower interventionism. That's just what happens. It starts with mood. And that mood becomes pervasive, and then becomes, how you treat people and how you interact with hundreds of people. And the feedback there is negative, and that puts you in a hole. And then you start fighting for your survival. The ego starts to fight for its survival. And then people tell you to go and fuck yourself and peel off. And then you're left on your own. And now you go into a state of panic, and you're desperately clawing. And in his case, putting out nasty stuff about me and what have you, which was complete illicit lies. And that's okay. I understand how that happens, but I'm not going to play into it. I didn't go public. I didn't say anything. I didn't try to defend anything. I don't need to. Anyone out there of any substance knows exactly who I am, including all the players, whether it's Sheriff Mack or Juano Sabin or whoever. These are intelligent people. So I'm not going to play into a bad man's bad theater when he's desperately clawing to get back on top. And that's more or less what that spiral was looking like. It was unfortunate. And I don't know how much interventionism that was, whether it was scalar or this, that, and the other. I just know it was bad appetite, bad action, bad conduct, bad use of words. And that was enough for me, but I don't want to let that last month or two of Robert's life color who the man was. Again, he had a beautiful nature and a caring and a compassionate and loving one. And remember this, for a man of that era, so to speak, really quite remarkable that he was able to expand his consciousness sufficiently in his basement to be able to speak to things like the colonization on Mars, which of course the gutter press, which is the mainstream press, of course they ridicule him about that. Alex Jones bailed on Steele when he announced that on his show. Alex shouldn't have bailed on him. Alex simply needs to be educated about jump gate technology. I've got astrophysicists who are triple PhDs right now that will sit down and educate Alex Jones and others about the technology, the jump gate technology, replicator technology. We have those technologies. They've been with us for some time in the basement. So colonizing Mars has almost certainly happened and very much underway, But the fact that Robert David Steele was able to be expansive enough and bold enough to actually drop those little bits and pieces, I think was actually courageous of him. Stupid, but courageous. He called me up the day of the Alex Jones show a couple of years ago, whenever it was. And he said to me, I'm going on Alex Jones and blah, 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 and shall I speak about Mars? I said, don't you fucking dare. Don't you dare, Robert. Do not mention the kids on Mars. And he said, yeah, you're absolutely right. When I explained the rationale, of course, bless him, being unfiltered, he ran away with himself and couldn't help it. And boom, I saw the sword of Damocles come down on him that day. It's like, oh, Robert, what have you done? And that was it. And he was just peeking into the kind of dynamic element, because I love Alex Jones. I mean, I don't care what people say about him. I just love the guy. I love all bold people, right?
Yes,
but that was a classic case in point of Robert. I still say I love the fact that he was bold enough to be able to, and expansive enough to be able to accept the probability of some of these more outlandish things. Then, of course, he had the capacity to also recognize the blood drinking going on in the basement and to speak to that. And of course, it was sitting through the Westminster tribunals, which I brought him in on. That, and listening to the testimony of so many powerful people, leadership as well as people who were witnesses and survivors, listening to that stuff and listening to the endless testimonies, you can only go away having all of your illusions shattered. Yeah, there he is. That's me sat in my pinstripe beside him.
Which was fabulous. That whole clip. This moment was when, Sasha, because let me just play 2 seconds of it so we can hear what he has to say. This is the International Tribunal of Natural Justice Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse, which is the moment, if we were to be live on YouTube, and done, and you're done, and you're on now, strike number 3. Yeah. So, but Brand New Tube will happily air anything about this and be very, very, behind promoting this information, that you've worked relentlessly on even creating this council and then choosing him as the chief counsel. So let's just play a couple seconds of what he has to say here. You are sitting next to him, but I think it just shows him here.
I have been a spy. I'm out from undercover. I'm under a lifetime secrecy agreement. I absolutely tell you without doubt, I have no secrets that I can remember. So if when I go to Iran soon, they can torture me, there's nothing there for them to get. But I know the system. I've been a spy all over the world. I have created the Marine Corps Intelligence Command. I have trained intelligence and law enforcement representatives, over 8,000 of them from across 66 countries. They are all, without exception, good people trapped in a bad system. And one of the most wonderful things that this court could achieve, now that we've had Pizzagate, for example, which opened people's mind, is we could achieve an opening of the public mind and an absolute imperative from the public to governments, including the US government, which I think is the center of gravity in so many ways. I have found in my research and preparation for this court and all of the work that will follow that most organizations that end up being used to prey on children, Oxfam is a recent example, all of the United Nations organizations, the Boy Scouts of America, all of the child services agencies across the United States of America, they did not start out as organizations to prey on children, but they attract pedophiles. And ultimately, pedophiles end up rising in the ranks and controlling those organizations, so that an organization that initially started out in the service of children becomes an organization that is in fact hunting children. And one of our distinguished commissioners has written an absolutely wonderful book called Child Hunters, which I recommend to all of you as a brief on this. Governments are letting us all down. And I absolutely agree with the commissioner who brings forward the need to restore the sovereignty of we the people, because governments have become not only bureaucratized, but they are now the servants of the deep state, of the banks. And if I may, the deep state is not the same as the shadow government. As I say, every organization is 90% good people trapped in a bad system. It's the
Obviously, you know what happened there because you were there, sitting next to him. So the International Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking was something that that you thought up or somehow combined forces with Robert David Steele. Talk to that for a second.
No, I thought it up and I wanted to bring it forth. I've become somewhat expert in the area of researching the phenomenon, but only after it had been brought to my attention by someone who had been the founder of the former founder of the Federal Child Tracking Agency in the United States, who'd come to see me in London many years ago. And he was the man who educated me over a couple of days to the truth of the missing children, so to speak. And that was, I think, 2007, more or less. And I then picked that up and moved forward with it, became very shocked by what I learned. And that incubated in me for a couple of years before I dropped my balls on the matter and decided to do something about it, because I didn't believe it at first. And then when I did believe it, I didn't want to believe it. And then I went in further research and started having, cold sweats and night fevers and all of that stuff, getting to grips with the horror in the basement. And then started to realize that it had to be addressed, absolutely had to be addressed somehow. And so forming the ITNJ, the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, was very much for me a chess move in that direction, understanding a fair bit about law and certainly understanding a great deal about natural law. I determined to establish a tribunal under the normative rules of engagement, so to speak, but meaning to say bar association, all that crap, which we all despise, but is part of the process. So what I want to do is establish a court that would make use of people connected to the old game of law and bring it into a new remit of natural law and natural dispensation of law. A very difficult task to undertake, which is why I chose some old symbology, which is not Illuminati symbology, it's natural symbology. Of course, idiot, turd, digital warriors accuse me of setting it up as a nouveau Illuminati court protectorate, using the symbology that I used there in the graphics, which is the pineal, the pine cone. Yeah, of course I used that symbology, and I freed the pineal. Look at it. Look at the symbol there. It's breaking free of the wreath of Caesars. It's breaking free of the enclosure of the hidden hand, and it's got the figure of 8, the symbology of infinity, allowing it to break free, and 2 hearts in conjugation with each other. That's the symbology there. Idiots will read it badly, of course, but that's what idiots do. And they will then look at the bishop in his pink robes, and of course, Order of St. John, he must be one of them. Robert David Steele must be one of them. Our judges from the Bar Association must be one of them. Sacha Stone must be one of them. Whatever. I don't want to speak to that. But what I want to speak to is the fact that we pulled this off. And we brought that conversation out from the basement into broad daylight. Has Robert been executed because of it? No. In my view, that's an absurd notion. He was fat, he was sick, incredibly depleted immune system, and he got bronchitis. He's very lucky he didn't get it 3 months earlier, frankly. And if he was taking ivermectin, he hadn't done the dosage correct, probably because he was a lot fatter than the average man. So ivermectin will only work according to body weight. Please remember that, people. So you might be taking ivermectin for 3 months, but if you're not doing it in the right ratio, it's not going to have the effect. And then, of course, he can't breathe, and he ended up losing all the buses. So he wasn't being driven around and with drivers, and he ended up having to drive himself in an SUV.
Yeah.
But I know that the poor guy's immune system got absolutely hammered, and almost certainly that's why he ended up in hospital, because he probably couldn't breathe, probably got a bronchial infection, catalyzed maybe by some exosomic response that he was having to the COVID-19 specter, which of course is simply a triangulation of mutant electromagnetic frequencies in a given area. And that can bring about that exosomic response, and the rest, of course, is medical murder in the hospital. And of course, the powers that be and the mainstream media, those that are bothering to look in on poor Robert's demise, are looking in on it and saying, well, there you go. He was one of the anti-COVID guys, but he dies of COVID. Who said he died of COVID? Well, it was them. It's just too absurd, this theater.
Hoax, kills, COVID denying, anti-vaxxer, COVID denying, who worked for the CIA. Like all of this, and then he ends up dying of, it's all over the place. But
well, you would have to grab the fetid little journalist who wrote this piece of shit by the scruff of the neck, take them out and hold them in direct sunlight, and then ask a question of them and see how they twitch. I don't know, but these are febrile individuals. They are not reporters. They are not journalists. They're not capable of any investigative anything. That they are immaterial and inconsequential and have zero relevancy, and they certainly don't impact the lives of human beings. So why they bother as scribes has been, for me, an extraordinary question. I've been subjected to attacks by mainstream, which didn't go well for the mainstream, put it that way. I think that, to answer your question, they decided not to overplay it or over-egg the pudding here, because it would have probably brought those of us who do have pretty clear voices and very large followings, it would have brought us out into the open. And I don't think they want to do that roundabout now.
Fucking love that answer. because that is exactly how I feel. And I thought to myself, what a great opportunity. He's ex-CIA. He was against COVID. Oh, he was on this tour. Why wouldn't they want to do a piece on even local news? Oh, this piece of this American tour. You guys had a lot of people even before you guys broke up. And then, of course, you and Scott McKay and Leah Daniels creating your own thing. I mean, I was at one of them. I saw the number of people that were there. And that's pretty incredible for you pulling that out of your ass after the breakup, right?
The parting of ways occurred foundationally because